Hi everybody, welcome back to the Crime Lab. So today we're going to be talking about Robert Hanson. He's known honestly as the Butcher Baker. He was actually active for about 11 years in the Anchorage, Alaska area. So he he has been convicted for abducting, raping, and murdering at least 17 women that we are aware of. There may have been more, but we know that he's associated with at least 17. And honestly, he was kind of known for where he would kidnap them, release them into like a wilderness area, so take them out into like the woods or like some back known country, let the women try and escape, and then he would go hunting for them. So his MO, so his modus operandi, was he was thought to have stalked these women beforehand, before kidnapping them, learning their habits, and then he would put them at gunpoint, kidnap them, bring them back to his home or like someplace that he knew very well, rape them, and then either stab them or shoot them. Like I said, there were some where he would take them out to the wilderness as well, let them try and escape, but then he would from there murder them. He would essentially hunt them. And a lot of the women, unfortunately, were teenagers or sex workers. And as many of us know, sex workers tend to be overlooked in true crime. They're kind of thought of as, to many people, less than. They're kind of overlooked, unfortunately. So he was born in 1939. He was the eldest of two, and he was born in Iowa. But his family moved to California in 1942, but then moved back to Iowa in 1949. When he was really young, he was very, very shy, had a stutter, had a lot of acne, was more than likely teased, right? As teenagers do. They tend to tease each other, especially if you look different. And that kind of made him be described later on as a loner. He wasn't really able to build a lot of like deep, meaningful relationships. And due to some other stuff going on, he had a relatively strained relationship with his dad. In his free time, he took up hunting and archery, which later on would kind of lead to that being associated with his crimes. In 1957, he actually enlisted in the Army, but after about a year of service, he was actually discharged. So then for a little while after that, he was working at a local police academy as a drill instructor, which is how he actually met his future wife. So kind of the start of his crimes, in December 1960, he was actually arrested for burning down the county school bus garage in Pocahontas County as revenge for mistreatment in high school. Because he was being bullied and harassed, he decided that he was going to commit arson. Served 23 months of a 3-year sentence. During that time, his then wife divorced him. He, at the time, was diagnosed with manic depression with periodic schizophrenic episodes. So manic depression is, a lot of people might associate it, hearing manic depression, associate with bipolar disorder, where you get the very basic description is like really high highs with the really low lows. He's not bipolar where he's getting the highs and the lows. He's just getting the really low lows. If that helps people understand it a little bit better, make it a little easier to chew. I understand there's a lot more to it. That's a very, very quick description for people that might need a simpler understanding. He was also described with having an infantile personality, and he was obsessed with getting revenge on the people that wronged him. So pretty much if you crossed him at all, he wanted to get back at you for that. And then he was arrested several times over the next several years for mainly petty theft. And then in 1976, he moved to Anchorage, Alaska with his second wife and his 2 children that he had with her. And while living there, he was well liked by his neighbors. If you're seeing the camera shaking, my cat just jumped up on my desk. She's being a cutie. And while he was living there, he had set several hunting records. So then kind of continuing with some early crimes prior to murder, like his murders and everything. December 1971, he was arrested twice for attempted abduction and rape of a housewife, and then also rape of an unidentified sex worker. He pled no contest, and part of the plea bargain was the rape of the sex worker was going to be dropped. So no contest essentially means most people are like guilty, innocent. No contest means I'm innocent, but I don't have like a way of proving it. There might be too much circumstantial evidence that, links me to it, but it's all circumstantial sort of thing. Again, that's a very simplified version. There's more to it. I'm not a lawyer. That is my basic understanding, is no contest means I'm innocent, but there's too much circumstantial stuff, or I can't necessarily prove that I'm innocent because I don't have, I wasn't at work. I was not necessarily with family. I may have been doing something else, but I can't prove that I wasn't there, but I wasn't there sort of thing. So based on that, he was sentenced to 5 years, and then he was placed on work release and put into a halfway house. So in a matter of speaking, he was still very much under surveillance by the prison system, and still very much under their control, but he was being allowed to work as well. And then in 1976, pled guilty to larceny after attempting to steal a chainsaw. And then again, at that time, he was sentenced to 5 years and received psychiatric treatment. As I said before, he was dealing with some manic depression and schizophrenic episodes. And his sentence was ultimately reduced 4 times served. So then now we're getting into his actual murders, the murders of the 17 women that he is known and associated with for. So his first victim, or first kind of known victim, was 18-year-old Celia Van Zatern. I'm going to kind of get into this a little bit, a little more detail about them. So if any descriptions of crimes may bother you, please feel free to move on to a different video. I understand that some of this stuff can be uncomfortable for people. So Celia Van Zatern, she was 18. She was kidnapped on December 22nd, 1971. She was found frozen to death in the wilderness after escaping. Her body was found on December 25th, so her body was found on Christmas of 1971. The abduction occurred 3 days after the assault on the sex worker that he ultimately got in prison for. So essentially timeline, he had assaulted a sex worker, an unidentified sex worker. Then the first murder that he's associated with is Celia about 3 days later, on the 22nd, and then she was found on Christmas. So then June 13th of 1983, 17-year-old Cindy Paulson, his next victim, was offered $200 to perform oral sex, and then when she got into his car, he held her at gunpoint and drove her to his house. From there, he tortured and raped her, and then later he told the police when he got arrested and was confessing to all of this that he put a chain around her neck and tied her to a post in his basement. And then later on, after he was torturing her, raping her, keeping her in his basement, he drove her to Merrill Field, and told her that he had intended to take her to a shack near the Canuck River area of, I have this written down so that I can attempt to pronounce this, Madanuska Susitna Valley. I probably butchered that horribly. And that area is actually only accessible by either boat or bush plane, so it's extremely remote. And she escaped when he was busy loading the cockpit of the plane. And then, when police started investigating a little bit, he told police that the blue sneakers were in the back, or she told police that the blue sneakers in the back of his plane were in the back seat, providing evidence that he had abducted her. And then she ran towards the road. He chased her, but when she was able to flag down a truck, he stopped. And then she was dropped off at the Mush Inn and called police from there. She was still handcuffed when the police arrived. And so she was then taken by police to their headquarters. She gave a statement about what happened. And then when Hanson was brought in to be questioned, he denied, saying that she was trying to extort him. And his alibi was, I'm a humble baker, and from there he wasn't considered a serious suspect. And then from there, they were investigating the area kind of based off of that, and they found several bodies in the Seaward Madanuska Susitna Valley area. And the first bodies that were actually found by construction workers in the area. So then from there, the FBI was contacted to help kind of provide evidence for like a profile. So if you're wanting to know kind of a profile, think Criminal Minds, how they'll try and figure out age. Okay, this is a white guy, this age, probably somebody that has a past of this, that sort of thing. So they determined that he was a serious hunter, a lot of experience, but somebody with low self-esteem, that he possibly kept souvenirs as like jewelry. How some serial killers will collect photos, or they'll go back to the crime scenes or whatever. He's possibly keeping something similar. Soon after that, because police remembered Hanson, they're like, we know that he's a hunter. We know we've contacted him in the past. We know he has an arrest record. Let's kind of see what we can find out about this guy. They got a warrant to search his house. From there, they're actually able to discover he did just that. He kept souvenirs, which was his jewelry, as well as he had several firearms in the house, associating him with being a hunter. And then they found a flight chart. A lot of pilots will keep like charts and maps of, where they've flown to and different landing spots, landing coordinates, that sort of stuff. Some hunters will do that, being like, okay, I've seen, really big bucks or really big bears or elk in these areas. These are areas that I like to hunt. Same sort of idea, but it was marked with 37 X's hidden behind his headboard. And after more investigating, they found out that many of those X's were related to bodies being found. So then, they continued investigating, found more evidence. When he was confronted with the evidence, he kept denying, and he began trying to blame his victims for as justification for what he did. So then eventually, overwhelming evidence, he really couldn't say like, oh, I didn't do it. He then was like, oh, they weren't teenagers or anything. They weren't all teenagers. Some of them were sex workers. As if that would make it better that, yes, I did this to teenagers, but, some people were sex workers, so they don't count. Again, being the kind of view, even nowadays, that sex workers are considered less than, and are unfortunately commonly overlooked because, they may have been forced into that sort of trade, or they just are unfortunately overlooked. So his victims, the ones that we were able to associate with Robert Hanson, I know I did a very quick synopsis. Those are the ones that we know about, that we were able to get tons of details. We have kind of a timeline of events that happened with them. So, like I said, there are 17 known victims associated with Robert Hanson. As his map has 37 X's, there's probably a lot more that just, police and investigators are not able to 100% associate with him, or don't have enough evidence to associate with him. So, kind of going through the list of the evidence that we do have. Celia Beth Van Zatten, she was 18. She was his first victim that we know about. Megan's, I'm going to attempt to pronounce these names correctly. Some of them are not ones that I've seen a lot, so I apologize if I pronounce them incorrectly. Megan Siobhan Emmerich, she was 17, last seen at her school dorm building. Mary Kathleen Thill, she was 22. She disappeared July 5th of 1975. She was dropped off at a local bakery and was not seen since being dropped off. Eklutna Annie, she's an unidentified woman. That's how she was associated. That's the name that she was given. Hanson had actually admitted to stabbing her. Roxanne Estlin, she was 24, vanished June 28th, 1980. Seen residing in a budget motel in Anchorage, and she was actually scheduled to meet up with an unnamed man on 4th Avenue, but she didn't show. Lisa Futrell, she was 41, met Hanson at a nightclub where she worked and was subsequently kidnapped on September 6th, 1980. And she hadn't shown up for her shift the following day. Sherry Morrow, she was 23, told friends that she was meeting a photographer that promised to pay her for nude images on November 17th of 1981. Andrea Mona Fish being a nickname. Altieri, she was 24, last seen getting into a taxi before going to the Boniface Mall on December 2nd of 1981. She intended to meet up with a man for a photo shoot and exotic dances. Suluna, 23, agreed to a photo shoot with a nightclub patron. On May 6th, 1982, she met Hanson in a parking lot and was not seen after. Robin Pelkey, she was 19. She was found April 25th, 1984. She'd been stabbed and shot. Delyn Sugar Renee Frey, 22, last seen in March of 1983, but was not immediately reported missing. Paula Golding, 30, she was lured and abducted by Hanson on April 25th, 1983. She had attempted to flee, but she was unfortunately shot. Cindy Paulson, she was 17. After agreeing to be paid for sex, she was kidnapped and assaulted, but she was able to get away. Malai Larson, she was 28, reported missing on July 10th, 1981. Teresa Watson, she was 22, last seen March 25th, 1983. Angela Lynn Fettern, she's 24, last seen on 4th Avenue in Anchorage sometime in February of 1983. Tamara Tammy Peterson, 20. She was a dancer at a nightclub. Last heard from August 7th of 1982. And so that was kind of his list of known victims that he was associated with. So he was charged with assault, kidnapping, multiple weapons offenses, theft, and insurance fraud. He entered a plea bargain after ballistic results matched the bullets to Hanson's rifle. So in that case, if there were still bullets and casings that were found at the crime scene, police are actually able to use guns. They'll shoot it at like a firing range, a specialized firing range. They're able to take the bullets and the actual casing, and they're able to match up from my understanding, how the gun kind of imprints onto the casing and how the bullet looks after it's discharged. There's like a certain, I don't want to say residue, but like there's a certain pattern that is left on the bullet and the casing, which is how they're able to associate it with certain firearms. So they did that, and that was associated to Hanson's firearm. And then Hanson showed police 17 grave sites around South Central Alaska, and 12 of those were actually unknown to investigators. They didn't even know that there was somebody there. And many of the sites, although he showed them to police, he wouldn't explain or give evidence that he was involved. Essentially just saying, hey, I know this is here. I'm not going to tell you why I know it's here. I just know it's here. And then remains of 12 of the possible 21 to 37 total victims were then exhumed and returned to families for proper burial or cremation, essentially helping those 12 families grieve and be able to get a little bit of closure about what happened to their family member. So then he was sentenced to 461 years without parole. He was first imprisoned in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania, but then he was briefly incarcerated at Lemon Creek in Juneau, Alaska. And then he was then moved to Spring Creek Correctional in Seward, Alaska until May of 2014, and then died in the Anchorage Correctional Complex on August 21st of 2014. So he died in prison. As I said, there is not necessarily a way to associate him with all of the murders because, he would only give evidence and admit to so many of them. And he would only actually be like, yeah, I did this, But, considering everything, I'm sure the families of his victims are happy that he's gone, considering all of the pain that he caused them. And I'm sure that all of the families of the victims that he didn't admit to are also happy he's gone, considering that they probably still associate him with the death of their loved one. But if anybody has any questions, comments, suggestions for future videos, feel free to leave them in the comments. And all feedback is welcomed.